Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight is part 2 of the book Jay Sebring, Cutting to the Truth. If you missed part 1 with Anthony DiMaria and Marshall Terrill, go back and check that out because we were doing a continuation of the book and finally setting the record straight. So without further ado, let's bring on Anthony DiMaria and Marshall Terrill, and we will dive on in. Hi, Anthony. Hi, Marshall. How are you?
Good evening.
Hey, good to see you, Danny.
Thank you guys and I've gotten a lot of great feedback from when you guys were on last time, and we kind of were able to very detailed talk about Jay and kind of getting more information out about him because that story has not been told. And finally, it's getting out there. So I just wanted to thank you both for that and for a great episode. Again, a lot of great feedback. And I know tonight we will be continuing part of the book and touching on the murders itself as well as the trial. And I feel like a lot of people who kind of maybe, who are into true crime, who kind of look at the case, that's maybe kind of where they start. So I'm hoping after listening to the part 1 episode that you guys were on, now they have an understanding of who Jay was, his career, what got him to this point, and now setting the record straight again from here going on. But was there anything last time that we did not touch upon that we wanted to get to before we kind of dive on in tonight?
Well, it's interesting. It was very dense, right? I mean, we covered a lot of ground, and it was phenomenal. It to me is kind of a blur. I don't even remember some of the things we covered, but again, it really is like Jay, the man who lived, and then the murders and the trial and the parole hearings and all those things, and then there's also the chasm between Jay Sebring, the man who actually lived, and a Jay Sebring. The victim prototype that was sculpted after he was killed, and so the chasm between those are really important, I think, and that's part of what was so crucial to the book, was really defining and illuminating the differences between the two.
Yeah. We have Weird Debbie in the chat that she's reading the book and on chapter 30.
Oh, wow.
For her.
That's a serious book. That's 5. Marshall, how many pages is it? 5?
I'm thinking 526, somewhere in there.
Okay. It's listed. I don't know if it's with the notes and everything.
No, I think with the notes, it's another 30 or 40 pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when I did my book review, the footnotes that you guys have are just as important to read as all of the content.
And did we address that, why we did it the way that we did in that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Great.
So let's go ahead and kind of pick back up from where we were last time. So we get to, and again, we can go in as much detail or as little detail as you both want to do in regards to. So there's been so much misinformation about the night of the murders. And in the book, you guys do a really great job of kind of explaining what the narratives are out there and what, bullshit those are, and then setting the record straight. But if we want to start in on the night, everything, I know there's still like thoughts of, did they go to dinner at, El Coyote and whatnot. Let's break down what happened that night from what you guys found in your research on Jay.
Well, okay. Marshall, you can take El Coyote and we can bounce on that.
You take El Coyote because you explored that a little bit more than I did.
All right. So what's really, really telling and interesting in all of this is we covered the whole I was supposed to be there that night.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Right. So this is something that is sadly ironic, and that when you have all these people, once it was safe for them to say that, they were somehow connected, everybody is saying how they were supposed to be there that night. And yet we know that Jay was definitively not supposed to be there that night. Now, we know this from, first of all, my father cuts hair as well, and he was cutting Anthony Newley's hair. and he was opening at Caesar's Palace that night on Friday night. And Jay was supposed to be in Las Vegas, and Valerie Perrine, one of a girlfriend of his, was also in Las Vegas. So Anthony Newley told my father he never understood how Jay could have been killed that night because he was expecting Jay to be at his opening at Caesar's Palace. And then that is corroborated. And then Valerie Perrine, she had mentioned about getting together with Jay that night. Now, whether it was for her to come to LA or when he went to Las Vegas. And then Joe Torrenueva, a couple nights before, I think it was Wednesday night, Jay had informed him that he was going out of town for the weekend. So that is one of the things, and we bring that into the book, but that's one of the sad tragedies that, and the realities in all of this is that Jay was not supposed to be there. Why he was there, I think will always remain an enigma. I mean, you can guess and maybe think, well, was she really uncomfortable and needed some care? Were things getting stressful between Abigail and Wojtek? And I'm not saying that they were, and that maybe he could be there as a buffer. And again, these are not things that we'll never know. And I wish he actually went to his original plans that night. So they talked about El Coyote, and it goes back and forth because the staff, most of them don't recall seeing them, and then some do. And then I think the most telling thing is in the autopsy reports that, the content of Jay's stomach was more like a soup. Mm-hmm. So albondigas is a Mexican soup, but that also has a fair amount of meat in it. So they said it was a brothy soup, and I don't know, that it just. And then there was people who couldn't identify any of the four at El Coyote. So I don't, it could be one of these things that is folklore. They were on the list, the reservation list, but I mean, it almost seems like maybe they didn't actually go. I would lean toward. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, let me just add this. When I was a cops reporter, and I talked specifically to the police chief about this case, and I just said, with the Manson case, and there's all this stuff going out there, and it's in the police report. And he said, as cops, you take everything in. You absolutely put all that information into the police report, and then you start to work your way into these leads. And so just because something is in a police report, so let's say, for example, yeah, they saw them that night at El Coyote, that doesn't mean that it was true, because if they look into it, that, for example, I mean, we don't know for sure if they were there or not, but that probably was in the police report. It was in the police report that Jay had been, tying up women and whipping them, right? So again, these were all rumors, but when I asked the police chief, why do you put that stuff in there? And he said, you have to put all that stuff in there, and then you work your way out of it. So just because something is in a police report doesn't mean that it is official.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yep. Got to document everything and then kind of work your way from there.
Right.
Absolutely.
But people, I think the public has this perception that, if it's in the police report, it's true. And right. Anthony and I have even talked about this stuff. There were things that were said to police officers, and I said to him, well, this person said this to the police officer. And Anthony said, well, maybe the police officer either didn't get it right, and that could be the case, or the police officer had a bias. And in this case, there were some biases, and I think Anthony can speak to that.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think that again, we'll get into what happened in the room, but there was a lot of things that were very interesting in that. Again, in the whole thing with that rope at Cielo Drive that connected Jay and Sharon. And then when Roman was talking about how Sharon mentioned that he has to tie her up once. And so then suddenly that's leaked out. And then I forget who it was. Nancy Bacon had this very lurid tale of such an incident. And I actually asked her some questions because she is a very fantastical tale. And when I asked her some questions that were just basic probing questions that kind of didn't make, she says, well, Anthony, it was a long time ago. And I said, well, yeah, but based on what you wrote, I would certainly remember this if I was in the room that night. And then her response, well, I was heavily under the influence of drugs as well. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then in a side story to that, I had a literary agent. And, Danny, if we covered any of this, because just stop me and say, we already covered this.
No,
But
you're good.
so I had, she asked me, and before I read the article, I mean, the chapter that she wrote of that crazy night, she said, I'm going to send this to you, but do you have a literary agent? And I did, because he was handling some of the stuff with the documentary and everything. And also they handled me theatrically in terms of acting. And so I said, yeah, I do. And she goes, well, can you please get a manuscript over to him, because it's a really good one, and it involves Hollywood and all these people. I said, great. So I sent it to Jim, and Jim looks at it, and I went in to talk to him in the office. I said, by the way, did you get that thing from Nancy Bacon I sent you? And he said, yeah. How do you know this woman? And I said, well, I was doing research, and he goes, okay, did you read what she wanted to be represented, what she wanted me to rep? And I said, no, I just said it. I just gave it to you. And he goes, yeah, don't do that. He goes, this is tabloid trash, man. I don't do tabloid shit. And that's not a disparagement. That's just what happened. And so there's all these things, but it's really interesting that the police report and the forensics, when they described Wojtek, they described him as being in hippie garb, wardrobe. Now, first of all, he wasn't dressed like a hippie at all. So there was a judgment there, and they're including and reaching and trying to get all the different things that were there. And there were a lot of inconsistencies in the police reports, not only with blood, but also, what was it? It was, I'll think of it when we come back, but,
And by the way, as I'm looking at one of the footnotes, it's, when there was an anonymous phone call to the police about Jay tying up people and whipping them, and we believe it was probably Nancy Bacon. But it's funny that she would tell Anthony, I don't remember, that was a long time ago. I mean, I would think as a woman you'd remember being tied up and whipped.
Well, and then she said it was a long time ago, but also I was heavily under the influence of drugs. And also, what's interesting is, when did that come out? It's kind of like that story about Sharon with the
book. The book came out in 2017. I think that was she died a couple of years before that, but I think the book must have been sold before her death.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but you see what I'm saying? So there's a different thing. There was even Aaron reporting, and they referred to Amos Russell as Jay's butler, and that Jay never had a live-in butler. That's completely false. Amos was a friend and worked with Jay. So, I mean, that's another glaring thing. They had dates wrong in their reporting with Paul Greenwald, who was Jay's friend and kind of electrician. So, and specifically to Jay, there's like 3 already just right off the bat that were completely errant. And what's also interesting is that there's so much talk about blood, Jay's blood at the front porch. And I really think that it's possible that it could have been as egregious as mislabeling, because there's blood on the gun in which Charles was bludgeoning Wojtek extensively. And so there would be tons of blood on that gun in the butt, but it's registered as Jay's. It's labeled as Jay's. And what's interesting for so many people who think there was something that happened out there. And by the way, Watson, in our questions to him, he said he has no idea how Jay's blood could have gotten on the porch, but that he assumed that the towel used in Sharon's blood to smear pig on the front door, that it definitely had to come from that. And none of the 4 people who were at that residence, none of the cohorts or murderers ever describe Jay and Sharon being outside that door, or any other kind of logistical order in which these murders occurred. It's completely impossible. And yet it's another way for people to hold on to something, to make it a whodunit or conspiracy, and all of those things. So Jay had spent the afternoon, the morning, late morning, and with a woman he had met the night before. And then he drove up to the Cielo residence sometime around, I think it was around 5 between four and around 5, I think, safe to say. And then so he was at the house. They apparently ate. They did something. A bike was delivered there, and you know, all those things happened. And but when it comes down to the murder, like there's different descriptions of what took place leading up to that. But we do know that Wojtek was sleeping on the sofa. Abigail was reading a book in her bed in the nightgown, and Jay and Sharon were talking on her bed and in her bedroom. And one of the things that doesn't make sense to me is how Jay could be seated at the corner of the bed. And if somebody were to walk in the door and see, maybe the door was slightly closed, maybe it could have been any number of things. But we know that Susan said that, you know, they had told everybody to come to the living room. And one of the things that was discovered in the book is that it appeared that, that very likely that Jay didn't. Maybe we don't even know if they knew they had the knife. Some, you know, Susan said she did. She said things and did things, but there's several people that said that they thought that Jay might have thought it was a joke. Now, there's something that happened that Wojtek said to Jay when he was on the sofa, and the man had this gun, which Beausoleil described. It looked almost like a comic book gun because it was a very long barrel type of a gun. And you know, again, I'm not speculating, but it's just. When Wojtek told Jay, because Watson said, shut up, another word from you and you're dead, I'll kill, whatever he said. And then Wojtek said, he means it, Jay. Now, that doesn't mean that Jay was laughing and like, you know, but there was a certain point when things shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was, we know from testimony that they went in there to do a systematic, organized, brutal killing. And if they did it that way, they could make things even more horrific than what they, you know what I'm saying? If you could even say that. So once Jay realized that things were horrifically wrong, when Watson was pacing back and forth, as he said, I was pacing back and forth, jumping up and down, making weird noises. When Sadie yelled, "Watch out." And I turned and emptied the gun on the man coming after me. So when Jay saw an opportunity to charge the man with a gun and a bayonet, he charged Watson, which we know from corroboration from all 3 people. He threw the left hand and he was shot through the armpit, through his lung. He started drowning in his own blood because that was filling his left lung. He collapsed. He was stabbed subsequently. Watson said when he started stabbing him, that Krenwinkel was already there stabbing him. So that's something that is, you know, that isn't brought up in the parole hearings. I've brought it up a couple of times, but Krenwinkel's never really specifically said anything one way or the other on that. Okay. So everyone thinks that Jay is dead. And now they're trying to organize everyone so that they can do this thing. They're told that this is a robbery. We're going to get money. We're going to do these things at a certain point. And by the way, Baden and in the forensic autopsy report, there were bullet fragments lodged in Jay's spine down towards his tailbone. So, and Baden had said that it is very possible that he might have been paralyzed from his waist down. But at a certain point, Jay starts to struggle to get back on his feet, in which Watson charges him and starts kicking him in the face and stabbing him in the back. And with Watson, the only one with a gun, the only one to keep everyone prone by the gun, with him focused totally on Jay. And, you know, by the way, when Watson, he answered some of the questions I had for him, and he said he attacked Jay because of the danger he posed. So, and these are his words, his exact words. And this is not something that he would have to contrive to try to like, oh, you know, there's no rationalizing these murders at this point.
Right.
So Jay charged him. So with him focused on Jay, Abigail could run for her life. I think that Wojtek saw this and ran for the front door. Susan was jumped on him and was trying to stab him and was stabbing him. And then she started screaming. And when she started screaming, Charles Watson actually said, "How long did you stab Sebring?" And he said, "Until Susan screamed and was fighting with the man out the front door." So now he went out the front door, and that's what allowed Abigail to run for her life. So I think it's really crucial in this. I mean, of course, I'm a blood relative, but I think that anyone who did what Jay did, not once, but twice, I mean, it's a Herculean effort. And the fact that he did that, it allowed them to run for their lives. And sadly, Sharon was pregnant. She couldn't run for her life because if she would have been able to run for her life, but at this point, the rope was already tied, so she was held hostage at this point. But had she not been, if possibly both the women could have run out through the back door, maybe they could have survived. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry. It's I'm just speculating at this point, but that's really Jay's last actions. I just don't understand how it's corroborated by all three of the people in the room. Krenwinkel said that everything turned violent and chaotic when after a scuffle between Jay Sebring and Charles Watson. She said that. Susan Atkins said that Jay Sebring did not follow Charles Watson's orders, which I don't know what following orders means in this case. But Jay didn't follow orders, and Tex, as she referred to him, shot him. And then Watson said that he turned and was alerted by Atkins and shot him after she alerted him as he was coming after him. And we know he was throwing a punch, what have you. He also, in his another report, referred to Jay as the man. He shot the man running after me. So these are they're definitive things. And I guess the reason I bring this up is, of course, I believe that anyone who did these things, it should be known.
Yeah.
And these are some of the most notorious murders in United States history. But why were these actions swept under the rug? Why were they hidden? And why were they omitted? You see what I'm saying? And that's a question that Bugliosi, I wanted to ask him. And it's a question that is very readily out there. And why is it that so many people with access to all this information, they also just throw it away as if it doesn't mean anything? And I wonder what that is. And then Susan Atkins she said that Jay reminded her of a samurai warrior. Now, what the hell that means, I don't know. But that is a hell of a thing to say in terms of with the corroboration of everyone. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Marshall,
I want to interject here. There's somebody out there commenting about Jay. Well, Jay was courageous, but he wasn't a hero. So I'm going to read you a definition of a hero. It is a person who is admired or idealized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. So I think that Jay definitely was a hero in this case.
Well, I tell you, I think even without that definition, and thank you for bringing that up, Marshall, because I can tell this fucking piece of shit, whoever he thinks he is and says this, I'm going to tell you something. That guy probably has never been in a street fight where he was in fear of his life. And he probably was never faced with a gun and a bayonet. Because let me tell you something. You know what's hero is standing up to something evil against all odds. That's a hero, man. And I when I see this stuff will get under my fucking skin. Now, so what is he saying? He's not a hero because he didn't.
No, he said that you're trying to paint him as a hero, and he's not a hero, but he was courageous, and that's quite a distinction.
Yeah,
he's a hero.
He's totally a hero. Mm-hmm. He's a hero across the board. But I mean, anyway, you shouldn't.
I just wanted to address that because he said it a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
No, thank you, Marshall. So I know we kind of touched upon this very briefly, and you didn't get the chance to get the answer from Vincent Bugliosi in regards to why these heroic actions from Jay were not being addressed in, Helter Skelter, the book that's supposed to be telling everything about what happened. Do you, either of you in any of your research and just kind of looking back at this, have any thoughts of why Vincent would just choose to not put this information out there and set the record straight?
Do you mean Anthony answer that?
You mean with Jay's final actions?
Yeah.
Absolutely, I do. And I think it's a fantastic question. It's another question. Why is it that people aren't saying, how in the hell, when everybody's in a room, and I realize we covered this, but this is another more context. How in the hell were 4 people two people escape out two different directions in the house, and the crime scene is so spread out. It's because of Jay Sebring. Now, I've always wanted to know why Bruce didn't. Vince didn't put this in his book. And in all my research, I started to realize, and it's right there in the front title. What is it? It's Helter Skelter, the all-time best-selling true crime novel. And Vincent Bugliosi, I don't know why it is, but I'm having a hard time not biting on my profanity right now tonight.
You can swear as much as you want to hear.
Yeah, but
go for it.
I don't know. Marshall shouldn't have said that to me.
I thought it had to be addressed because
and I think
I've seen it twice, and I thought I don't want this to be a running theme that he wasn't a hero. Well,
yeah, man. Listen, if you stand up to somebody twice your size and try to stop and fight them, and if you do, let alone a man with a gun, a bayonet, and two other individuals with hunting knives, come on, that's not even a conversation. This is somebody who's never ever been in that situation. Bugliosi wrote his own true crime novel. Novel is the word. Mm-hmm. And he even in his book says the cast of characters. Mm. That's insipid. You mean we're going to talk about 10 people being killed, and these people who did horrific things to human beings and were really just low-life, parasitical scumbags, and then they're rewarded for murdering 10 people in horrific, heinous ways. The victims and their killers are part of the cast of characters. Is that the way he saw this? Well, sure, because he's selling a novel that he's going to make a lot of money, and he did make a lot of money on. So when you refer to this impish dwarf as the face of evil, and what you're doing is you're trying to make him more diabolical, more frightening, which he was a very despicable, violent, dangerous man. But was he the face of evil? And when you see him in the Life magazine and all the pictures and everything, and it's like he was sculpted into something he wasn't even a sniff of. And that's not even, that's just the bad side of it. So by Bugliosi making him the face of evil that is controlling our women and our homecoming queens and secretaries and football captains, I will save you, America, from this diabolical person. So the more evil and diabolical Charles Manson, the villain is, the more heroic the protagonist of his own true crime novel is. So if I bury what someone does, may I say a hero, courageously, against all odds, what he did, not once but twice, he's the hero incarnate. Not someone saying, hey, look at me, I did all these things. That's why he swept all of that under the rug. But what's interesting is, what is it about so many people in the public now, and so many people who have done all these different books and magazines and podcasts and documentaries, why haven't they tapped into that? I mean, I would say this is pretty profound. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the formula. It's part of the formula. Strip the victims of their humanity. If they're innocent, if they're at the wrong place at the wrong time, if they stood up to something against all odds, that's not as fun. That's not as compelling. But if they're, weird, creepy, illicit, kinky, decadent, then it's fun. Then we can all enjoy ourselves. You know what I'm saying?
Well, even using the word characters, you're already saying to the reader, like, there's a distance between you and them, and this can't ever happen to me. And I haven't even you're new picking up Helter Skelter and haven't read it before. You're already in the mindset of like, all right, when I think of a character in a novel, it's something that's, fictitious.
That's exactly right. And it's a very astute point. I mean, it's really, and it's intentional. It's totally intentional. And so I hope that answers your question. And I think there's a reason why Vince declined to be interviewed. I mean, I reached out to him for over 10 years. And he's been on every single news station. He's done tons of documentaries. He's done all kinds of things. But he knew. And I would have asked him the typical questions, But then I would have got into this character, this little psychological profile you did on Jay. Where'd you get that? Why didn't you put what Jay did in the last moments of his life? That's pretty significant in all of this,
Yeah.
Among so many other things.
But we've heard so many stories about Bugliosi wanting to control things behind the scenes with documentaries and books and everything. He had to see questions before they were asked, and he wants to control that narrative because that is his story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his cash cow. There's no doubt about it. And that's the other interesting thing in all of this, how all these people, there seems to be different camps of people who are titillated and excited and experience these crimes as a form of entertainment or even as some sort of existential worth. And it's like, so you have the people who, this is the Hollywood Babylon. Then you have, it's a conspiratorial thing. And then it's, well, no, Manson really didn't do all these other things. And then there's the whole drug camp, and there's other camps, and then they all kind of fizzle. And what's interesting is none of them really have any kind of documentation or hard evidence and or corroboration. None of them. And yet, what's funny, Marshall and I write this book and in the documentary as well, and people are like, "Oh, well, they're revisionist and they're trying to make this guy a saint." No, I actually think he's I wouldn't say he was a saint. He would be a rugged edgy saint if he was, but he sure did a hell of a lot of unbelievable things in so many different ways in his life. Was he a red-blooded American in the 60s and enjoyed all of that? 100%. Does that make him bad? No. Did he hurt people? We have no evidence of anyone charging him of anything, any complaints, any of that stuff. And yet people are saying, oh, this book is a whitewash. And, all this stuff. And what's interesting too, but how many people have gone to Greg King or Tom O'Neill or Shrek or there's like a bunch of these people, and I've not really read all of their books, but enough to know it's bullshit. It's a sculpted narrative to fit an agenda. But I wonder if some of these people would ask for the same type of corroboration and evidence and documentation, hard fact proofs. You know what I'm saying? And some of these authors, many of them said, oh, well, yeah, this stuff is really, I think this is all I know is it's something more than what is understood. Okay, well, then tell us what it is and show us your facts, which is precisely, for the most part. There can be titillating connections, but if you were to ask me my opinion on all these different authors, there's something abnormal and unhealthy about people who either have a massive obsession with these crimes and or have some sort of personal stake in it, that they are so passionate and zealous about these things that they would be now, listen, and I'm not one of these people a mile in my shoes. I don't believe in that. I believe people can be sympathetic and empathetic at the same time. And I don't feel the need to say, hey, I got the goods on this, I have no. I even said earlier, there are always going to be some enigmas and with regard to this case and so many other cases. But I operate on facts and truth. Marshall and I, there was no wavering from that. With Johnny Bishop, Chad Lane, Boss Beretta, and when we did the documentary, there was no wavering from that. Because for whatever reason, it seems that we're being held to a higher standard, or maybe a higher standard wouldn't be the right word. It's a different standard. Meanwhile, someone can write a book about the Martians, and everybody's, oh, fuck, see, extraterrestrials are out there. See, they did it. And I'm being serious. Joe Rogan does a podcast on that, and everybody's going to buy it, And so when you
that's a whole other conversation in itself, but
it is. And
but you have that familial tie that nobody else can bring to the table. So, and you've said before where it's, well, you're too close. It's like, okay, well, so you can't tell the story, but someone who's never met Jay can, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And again, for whatever reason, it's like, okay, you were too young. Okay, and we already covered that. Jay really left that indelible impression on me, and he did to anyone who met him. And then to be reminded sometimes monthly or whatever, or yearly throughout the years about how these things have epically been not just distorted, but sensationalized and treated as entertainment. So much so that people who have no skin in the game, no blood in it, they're like they have all these major passions, and even these different subsects of people who have exploited these crimes or enjoy these crimes as consumers, they start to go after the other camp of people. So you got the one people saying, oh, the Babylon, Hollywood Babylon, that's not what it was. And no, it wasn't the government agencies. No, it's this and it's that. And it's like for anyone who would question what the book and the documentary and any of the information and discovery it's proven by, again, I keep saying documentation and evidence and forensics and corroboration. For anyone to question that and ask us if that we're whitewashing or having a revisionist version of reality, I would ask them, did you read the book? Did you read the book? And did you watch the film? If you read the book and you say that, then I would say this is a foregone conclusion. It's a lost cause. And it's like trying to tell somebody who believes the earth is flat that the earth is a sphere, if they could even comprehend such a thing. And it's at that point, I don't waste my time with them.
Yeah. And part of the whitewashing, a lot of it has to do with the drugs. And we specifically talk about Jay and drugs. There's pot, there's LSD, there was cocaine, but you would be surprised at the amount of people that I have interviewed in their 80s and 90s who have done all those things. And it's weird to hear it come from their mouth, but that was just part of the scene back then. Everybody today thinks it's terrible and it's illicit. But you got to remember, cocaine wasn't really denounced in the 60s or 70s. It was considered quote unquote non-addictive. And it was a quote, it was a drug of the rich people. But man, it was prevalent in Hollywood. And so, but everybody pretty much did it. And it was just part of that, especially in Los Angeles. It was part of the entertainment scene. And stating that Jay partook of that I don't understand where we get accused of whitewashing when that is in there in the book. I mean, it's part there. It's all in there.
So, and I think, can I say on that note, and it's very important. I mean, it's astute note, and also contextually, drugs weren't understood the way they're understood now. And in all three of the cases of the drugs that were mentioned, in many ways, they were considered mind enhancing. And Jay was always, and this is not whitewashing. This is the way the man was wired and how he thought. That's why he loved Joshua Tree. And he did have clients like Timothy Lear wasn't, and Aldous. There were some guys that were like, making LSD. And people were, and even today, they're
Owsley. It was Owsley who made LSD for the Grateful Dead.
Right. And
Joe told us he was a client.
Yeah, he came into the shop at Sebring. And so these were things that people were sharing with each other. They're like, hey, this, you want to try this? You want to do that? Oh, yeah, that's great. And you go out there, you do mescaline or whatever. And Jay, Steve, and Dennis Hopper, Steve McQueen, that is. And this was, by and large, this is not to make excuse because, but it really was a different context. And people were really trying to look beyond. And it was a different idea. And also the drugs weren't as dense. They weren't as... So without getting into that, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, Marshall, because Dennis in his interview we did for the doc, and you would think that, and we didn't even, I don't think we didn't even use it, which is ironic. But Dennis was like this whole, he was Easy Rider. He was the person, like the face of all of this. And I want to read a quote to you. And also I want to make this statement real important because there's a lot of young people in this that might see this. There's teenagers, there's grade school kids, and drugs, unfortunately, remain or have become a massive problem. And so there's nothing glamorous about drugs, and it can take things to where things get out of control, and you can really hurt yourself or someone else. So the fact that we're being candid in this book, and that it's been discussed, we're not treating it lightly and it's not flippant, but we're trying to give context to it. And so my concern is for any of the youth today that might consider any of this stuff or see that it's not cool, it's not hip, it's, being solid and having integrity and having a skill and expressing yourself, that's cool and hip. But this is what Dennis Hopper said about it. And again, he said, quote, "We had thought of ourselves as the really hip, slick, and cool generation when really we had used ourselves as guinea pigs for almost every new drug that came out. It was fun for a while, but it certainly turned against all of us."
Yep.
End quote. And, you know, when he said that to me, I was like, wow, I did not expect anything like that to come out of Dennis Hopper's mouth. But again, and then when I saw him talk about the last time he saw Jay, and he started crying. And then when, you know, I thanked him, and he hugged me, and he says, "I love you, man." And he meant it. At least yeah, that's the way I took it. But I mean, so it is amazing when we go through the context of things, and then we talk to these amazing people who were there, and it really brings so much more light to it, and then this dark, nefarious that feeds into those narratives, you know, of decadence, and they had it coming, and you know, we're going to make sense of these crimes, which you earlier, Danny, made such great point about.
And let me add one more thing for context. I think the line of demarcation for drugs started shifting with the deaths of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. And that started in 1970, which was about a year after, you know, the murders. So that's when, you know, before it was an experimentation, and then, oh, this can kill you. That's when I think it all shifted.
Good point. Absolutely. So where you were touching upon, you know, the drug theory, there's a lot of theories in different kind of camps that if people looking at this are very, and like you said, people who really aren't tied to it, really just stick to that. But James Watson in the chat here asked a question. I'm not sure if you even have an answer. It says, can Anthony break down what the motive to this crime was in his opinion?
No, it's not my opinion. It's the facts. No, I'm joking. And I appreciate the question. It's a very good question.
And you can put James Watson in his place, because honestly, he's a pain in the ass in the chat. I'm just kidding.
No. Is he bigger than me?
I think you could take him off.
Okay. All right, James. No, in all seriousness, James, I appreciate the question. And I think it's a hugely important question, because this goes back into the narratives of everything, and how I'm going to package and sell this to you, and how you're going to consume it. And so, like I said, because I feel that so many of these narratives are flawed and they're based on false premises, that's why you have all these people going back and forth. And it's a very mutually exclusive pattern that happens. So if I say, oh no, it wasn't a drug deal, those murders had nothing at Cielo, had nothing to do with the drug deal. Oh, so you believe it was helter skelter? No, I didn't say that. But it wasn't about this. Oh, so it was about, you know, so what I'm saying is this was not one motive. If we are to understand the Manson family as a crime gang, everything starts to make sense. So there are so many motives that if I forget any, Marshall, please remind me. But from the moment they formed as just Manson and Krenwinkel and Bruner and some other woman, early on, he started pimping them out, prostitution, different things. And so they were a crime group from the very get-go, but they had the hippie optics. So as they grew, so did the need for money. And they never stopped. They never worked, ever held a normal job. None of them, from late 67 all the way through after the crimes, the other people even. So what did that involve? It involved pimping, prostitution, drug trafficking, credit card fraud, check fraud, grand theft auto. Oh shit, there's so many other things. Extortion. There's a million things. Drug burns. When Bernard Crowe was burned by T.J. Wellerman and Charles Watson, that was the fuse that lit the powder keg. That's when everything, that all these felonious crimes, and there might have been some crimes before that, you know, but I don't think so. I think that was the seminal point that turned them into a very violent, unpredictable, and very stupid violent crime gang. And that's Robert Beausoleil's own words. He actually said, we made bad choices and did stupid things, and they got stupid, and anyway. So So after that burn, now Watson and particularly Manson is crapping his pants that the Panthers are going to come after them and take them out. So now he's got to make things right, and he tells Wellerman, "You have to take care of this shit that you put us into. You got to clean house, the shit that you gave us." So Wellerman freezes, and Manson's forced to shoot Bernard Crowe in the gut. He thinks he killed him. He didn't kill him. They hear about it soon after on the radio that a Black Panther was dumped off, that was shot to death at UCLA. Now Manson knows he killed him, which he didn't, but that's the thinking. And that's the thinking at the ranch. And now everybody at the ranch is crapping their pants. So now they still need money. And one of the things they did was extort people. And Beausoleil had brought Gary Hinman to the family. And Gary Hinman, a totally innocent, productive guy, he was partying with them and had a good time like a lot of other people did. But Manson sees that as a way to extort him for a tremendous amount of money. And there's some other things in there that, but just to get through this quickly, now he wants to extort him of his money and all these different things. It goes awry. He's extorted, tortured for 3 days, and then he's killed. So they take his cars. And then on August 6th, Robert Beausoleil is arrested in Gary Hinman's vehicle. Now the shit's really hitting the fan. So now the Manson family, according to Manson, is the Black Panthers are after them. One of their guys just got pinched, and he's going to rat them all out. They got to get him out of prison. They got to get him out of jail, wherever he is, And so now they're desperate to get this. This is less than 2 days. This is a day and a half before the murders at Cielo. And people don't make that connection. They think that these murders, as so many people have sculpted in their books, is just 2 nights of random violence. Bullshit. There was a whole litany of things that led up to this. So now Manson sends people. Watson, who also screwed up in the drug burn, he sends them over there. They both know the layout of Cielo. And this was a bit of a discovery for me when I was doing this like 20 years ago. But when they went up there, now what he's doing is total prison yard shit. He wants to get everybody's hands dirty in this. So he's not the only one. Everyone's going to get their hands dirty, and I didn't kill anybody. But what he's doing by sending them out there. Oh, by the way, when you put Political Piggy on the wall with paw prints at Gary Hinman's crime scene in blood, that's the Black Panthers. That was intentional. So now they also, so they go up to Cielo and they kill the movie people that they knew of that were there. I didn't know that Manson knew that Melcher did not live there. And so, but he knew movie people lived there. And we know from our research with Charles Watson just several months, it's less than a year ago, right, Marshall? That we
Right. Yeah, it was 2024. Okay,
so he confirmed that he had never heard of Jay, that Manson never named any of the victims, Sharon Tate, Jay, no one by name. So he knows there's movie people there. And so now Watson has to make things right for what he fucked up in the drug deal. So go up there, kill the people, make it look like the Panthers. So Political Piggy and Pig, that's not even subtle. That's like this. It's not even blatant. It's obtuse. And so now they're trying to frame the Black Panthers again. They're trying to do a copycat motive to spring Robert Beausoleil from the jail. They're saying, see, this guy's in jail. He couldn't have committed these crimes. There are duplicates of each other, which is astonishing that law enforcement didn't make that connection. Because if they did and they were starting to search around, they would go after, Bugliosi and push it. You know what I'm saying? Like, whoa, this could be something more. Do you know any of these people? Is this the Panther? Whatever. Maybe a couple would have, the LaBiancas would have survived. So now what you have, and then they do the same thing with Death to Pigs at the Waverly. So that's 3 attempts to frame the Black Panthers. So what you want to do is you want to frame the Black Panthers. You want to get the heat off from the Black Panthers for retribution. You want to spring one of your own so he doesn't rat everybody out, Robert Beausoleil, from prison. That's 3 motives right there. I do believe that Helter Skelter was something that was not the prime motive. If somebody think it was a drug burn, it was. It was the drug burn of Bernard Crowe. That's the drug angle from it. But it was no drug deal from Cielo. I mean, do you mean to tell me that after 55 years, more than 55 years, with all the resources of law enforcement, detective work, with all the writers, the podcasters, the documentarians, all the tabloid people, all the goofballs who have too much time on their hands. We're talking tens of thousands of people. If there was a drug, and by the way, law enforcement thought there was a drug angle in this. They like were heavy into the drug scene at CLO. That's what they thought it was. And now you have all these resources, and even the killers themselves at hundreds of parole hearings, not one person slips up and says that there was a drug angle or any involvement with their victims. So the likelihood of this is precisely zero when it comes to the drug burn at CLO Drive. How likely is it possible that there's not one kernel of evidence in all of this shit? So I mentioned like four. We I think there's even more in the book. Marshall, can you help me on this? I'm trying to think.
Well, I mean, there was also the accusation that Jay and Wojtek beat up Manson 2 nights before. So there was that accusation. Jay was the Candyman. We should probably address Candyman because everybody wants to hear it. So
yeah, please.
And again, it's addressed in the book thoroughly. So there's no whitewashing of this. The Candyman accusation came from Tatiana Siegel, correct? And she was writing for, was it Hollywood Reporter?
Hollywood Reporter.
Yeah. So again, as a journalist, I could never see myself writing something like that without attributing it to somebody. So if I'm going to be calling somebody the Candyman and say Hollywood called him the Candyman, I'm going to at least try and get one voice in there to say, hey, he was called the Candyman. But that was never put in the article. So I just, but for some reason that has stuck to Jay unfairly, and it's part of his Wikipedia page now. It's part of this thing that has stuck to his reputation.
Yeah, and I think that it was that article in which Jim Markham was interviewed, and he made the allegation that Jay and Wojtek had beaten up Manson, and we know from evidence that Manson wasn't even in LA County. He was out near San Diego, and it was the day before the alleged was made. And so where that story came from, and I think, Marshall, it's correctly described in our book, in Jay's story, that it was maybe he got that from scuttlebutt at the shop. Maybe he's hearing things. But we know definitively that logistically it's impossible that Jay and that Manson was even at the residence the day before. He wasn't even in LA County. Now, again, what was so damning in all of this, and it's like, why in the hell would you even bring that shit up? I mean, there's no facts of it. And does anyone in their right mind think that if that occurrence even happened, it wouldn't be known with all the people and all the eyes that are on this case? How in the hell could that possibly be missed? But it doesn't matter. It's all moot because the man wasn't even in LA, let alone Benedict Canyon.
Right.
So and that's a huge, but here we have a situation where everything's flipped upside down. So this article, now according to this article, Jay and Wojtek are violent criminals, and the actual violent criminal is getting his ass kicked by the. It's that absurd. And so when I wrote several emails to the Hollywood Reporter and Tatiana Siegel, they were like, no response in terms of the Candyman. No one said, well, no one could give any where that come from. I asked for a formal apology. I asked for the record to be corrected. None of that happened. In the article, Markham had said, evidently, I don't want to talk about the drugs. I don't mean to laugh, but I don't want to talk about the drugs because I still talk to the nephew who's doing a movie about the murders. And, well, first of all, I guess drugs were already mentioned by you. I mean, so I don't, what do you mean you don't want to talk about the drugs? But again, how the article even took place, I have no idea. But the only thing that they corrected, this is unbelievable to me. And maybe it's because they thought that would be concrete proof that they could get sued. I have no idea. But I wrote scathing emails. I said, where's your do you have shame? Where's your decency? Where are the facts? And when I corrected them and said, I'm not doing a movie about the murders, I would never do a movie about the murders. I'm doing a movie about the man, Jay Sebring. And they changed it. They changed it later in their electronic links. That has gone on all over the world on Oxygen and all these other platforms. He's doing a movie about his uncle or something like that. That's the only thing they changed. And they kept everything else in there. The stuff that is completely refutable and completely slanderous. And what's really devastating is that it was so slanderous that post on Wikipedia that you mentioned, Marshall, that came up as a result of that article. And you know, I don't know why it was mentioned, but Markham is mentioned in that Wikipedia post that was publicly stated. And I just and so it's on Wikipedia now. And it's been up ever since that article came out.
Let's also mention what was it that I was going to mention? Joe Gunn. We talked to Joe Gunn about Jay possibly being a drug dealer, and Anthony can give context to who Joe Gunn is and what he had found.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so for people who don't know who that is, can you just briefly say so people know the connection?
Sure. So Joseph Joe Gunn, was a 20-year veteran of the LAPD. He was a commander, the youngest commander ever at LAPD. He'd been on the police commission. He had involvement overseeing all agencies of the LAPD. He also did work in the NARC division. And he also, this is some side tech, also contextual, he's like the Frank Serpico that from NYPD, New York Police Department, of the LAPD. So he's a straight shooter. And so there was what Serpico did is he revealed the corruption in the police department in New York City, and he was almost killed for it. And Joe Gunn, he broke a case on LAPD corruption. And he was the seminal. He was the one who brought it all down. And he said the difference, Anthony, is that Serpico, they tried to kill him by doing the right thing, and I was treated with respect in LA with the LAPD. And so that was a very interesting thing. But he's a straight shooter. He's very respected, and he's been a technical advisor, and he's a great writer on television and film. So he had stated that when they make an arrest in the NARC division or with all these different things, let's say if you can't get an order to arrest somebody, but when you hit somebody and you get them to talk, when people are dealing drugs of any kind of significance, their name comes up no matter what. He says there's always whisperings. There's always, when you're picking up all these drug dealers, it's always gonna go to the next level. That's how they do deals. You know what I mean? You're looking at 15, but if you tell me something, I can get you off. You know what I'm saying? And he said never once did the name Jay Sebring ever come up. He never heard the name Jay Sebring ever come up in those.
And Jay would have been a prime name, right? Like that would have been big headlines for the LAPD if they could nab Jay. Yeah, and Donnie, I had sent you the FBI profile that that they did of the surveillance that they did of the whiskey in 1964, and you saw some celebrity names on there like Steve McQueen, and of course Jay was in there as well. But what it goes to show you is that they back in LA they had surveillance on everything and everybody, and they knew who was doing what. And if Jay had been doing anything in terms of selling drugs, that would have come up and they would have gladly arrested him. But that's kind of common sense that nobody really ever talks about.
And that surveillance, and Marshall really had quite a bit of insight on that. And if that surveillance was in fact going on, it goes right back to, that would be very significant to bring up in the police report, much larger than, the victim was wearing hippie garb and that he had a live-in butler. Do you know what I'm saying? And so, I mean, that's even more corroboration of like, it's just, first of all, it didn't happen. But second of all, it's like so impossible, almost satirically laughable, that with the preponderance of the focus of all these agencies, there's no way that wouldn't be in the police report. And trust me, Jay was the seminal person among all of these people. That's another thing that people don't understand. It wasn't that Jay was interesting because he cut McQueen's hair. Steve McQueen wanted to emulate Jay Sebring. Nancy Sinatra told me that. I mean, Cameo Sebring told me that. I mean, there's something. Linda Lee said that about Bruce Lee, about Jay, Jay's style and persona and charisma, on how he impacted Bruce Lee. And it's evident if you look at Bruce Lee before he met Jay Sebring, and you look at him when he became the huge film icon that he was. That's Sebring influence across the board, from the hair, the clothes, the whole demeanor, everything. So,
yeah. So I know we went a little bit more detail into a lot of the things, and I'm really glad that you're giving a lot of context to this, because these are very important points that are discussed in the book that, again, aren't really discussed anywhere else when the information's right there. So it could have been all of this time, and it just hasn't. One of the things in the book, just going back to the night of the murders, when I was reading and as a reader, the way it was written is just so matter-of-factly and to the point, but I could sense, and if I read this wrong, please let me know. But when you guys talk about in the book the physical evidence and the police reports and the coroner's reports of what happened versus the narrative that's out there, it just like this level of frustration where you're like, this is out there. And if we could just kind of talk a bit about that, because I know that's what I think a lot of people, one, are interested in hearing, but two, are interested in hearing the right information finally. So if you guys could kind of touch upon that.
Well, let me add something here, maybe for context, and that is maybe at the time, not everybody had that information, or only a few people did. That, like when I started writing books in '93, I didn't have access to the information. Now I can access everything. I can, and with that, like for example, when I did that book in '93 on Steve McQueen, nobody knew who his father was, where he came from. I redid the book in 2010. Now I had Ancestry.com. I was able to access who this guy was, photos, where he was all these years, things that Steve McQueen didn't even know about his dad. And so I think could be the case here. And maybe Anthony can back me up, but it could be that we now have information and access to things that perhaps other authors didn't. Certainly, I mean, Bugliosi obviously had access to these things, trial transcripts, but maybe he didn't have access to some other things. Anthony, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that there was something. Hang on, let me. I want to write something down. I think that what you're describing is a lot of what was happening, and that we're discussing now. There's Jay Sebring, the man who lived, Jay Sebring, a man portrayed after he's dead, and they're completely polar opposites. So you have the murders. Let's stick to Cielo. So you have what actually took place, and then you have what was reported in the months following, and they're two polar opposites. They're both, let's say if they both existed, the latter, horrific and brutal, but one is fantasy and one is reality. And I can't help but feel that there was something going on between the media, the so-called witnesses, the people, and anything. Steve Kay said this, that anything that anyone said was put into print and accepted as gospel. So how they got, and again, this, how they got that, Time magazine, that there was the walls were riddled with bullets, and that, there was sexual mutilation and X-spots and X carved into the body, and the breast was severed, and Jay was sexually mutilated. Wojtek had his trousers pulled beneath his boots, insinuating, some sort of sexual crap. it's really astounding, and it really does speak to these crimes and the unique quality, the unique, what's the word, stigma. That's not even strong enough. There's something about these crimes that just made people go fucking nuts, and for whatever reason, it like blew away their suspension of disbelief. It was like it was the animation of their belief, and it just, the world went nuts. So now we have a baby being cut out, you know, and sexual mutilation, and a penis is in the ice box, and this orgiastic thing was happening in the house, and it's just, there's no way to really understand it. But I do believe that everybody was so fast, and Joe Hyams, the publicist, admitted to writing tales about this. A friend, a significant friend to Jay Sebring and Sharon Tate. And I wish that I could have met him, first to hold him responsible, but secondly to commend him for taking responsibility. He's the only person who ever admitted to writing up not just a few tales, a lot of tales. And he said he made a lot of money doing it. So, you know, when these people, when everyone's murdered and suddenly they're warlocks and witches, and there's goblets with rat poison, laced with rat poison, which sounds like a good way to, you know, like have a Halloween party, maybe, you know what I mean? You guys come to my house and I'll say, hey, there's going to be a goblet with my favorite Chianti, and another one will kill you, but have a drink and you pick, you know, and maybe if I was feeling adventurous, I would actually do it. I mean, who reads this shit and thinks it actually happened? You know what I'm saying? And it's like,
a lot of people, apparently.
Exactly. It's exactly right. And so I guess you could see that, you know, between the witch, the warlock, the eating of raw flesh slabs that were strewn across Jay's backyard with some person hitting a tom-tom drum. This is a real story.
Yeah. And that goes to prove my point. Like, for example, when Steve McQueen was on his deathbed, I have the tape. They asked him, the guy asked him how he thought they died, and he said that Jay was dating a warlock. Jay was dating a woman who was seeing a warlock, and McQueen actually believed that. So there was so I guess the information was grapevine as opposed to facts, and somehow or another that grapevine has been transposed to facts, or people believe this kind of stuff. And McQueen was one of his best friends, and he believed it to the end of his days. So,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, it goes to show that really kind of the only information that was out there was whatever reporters were cooking up. Well, and as a reporter, I can't imagine myself doing that. That would be crazy for me to write about speculation. I mean, that all you have as a reporter is your reputation. And I just find it so hard, because when Anthony and I were discussing this in the beginning, I wasn't even believing him until he showed me the Time magazine, and there was no name attributed to the article, and I'm like, oh my God, because I thought, wow, these standards have been passed along to me and the generations before me. They were really hardcore, but that didn't turn out to be the case. Not in this instance.
Well, I mean, even Quincy Jones, he thought that Sharon's baby had been cut out, and he thought that Jay's was sexually mutilated, and he couldn't believe that didn't happen, and yet he was relieved in a very humane way that didn't happen. And I think, again, I mean, what we're talking about right now is very interesting, because they're connected. What is it about the murders that they would blow it so out of proportion from what it really was, when there was no need to do it, right? Yeah. And then what was it about Jay, who, okay, he was a racist, he was a kinky pervert, he was a drug dealer, he was a coward, he's all these things. And and I keep hammering this because this is one of the seminal points of the book. And yeah, he was a hero. But the point is he was essentially the polar opposite of everything they attributed to him to be. He was not a racist, you know what I mean? He was completely, he's responsible for Bruce Lee's career. It's like, and for a guy that was that dark and creepy and tying up, and he sure had no shortage of a lot of beautiful women. And I said this before, that wanted to be. He was very successful in that aspect of his life. So he was doing something right, And if he was in debt, No, he wasn't in debt. He was actually doing quite well. And that's before all the work and the investment that he was putting in his business was coming back, that he could, reap what he sowed. Or sow what you reap. What is it?
Reap what you sow.
Reap what you sow. Yeah. He was well before that, And now you look at all these crazy things. Okay, he's a drug dealer. Where's the evidence? Nothing. The murders. It's much, and then then we do have to, then Wojtek. I mean, he was stabbed 50. I mean, it was just really, there was overkill. And what was not interesting, but what Baden did say is that while Jay was stabbed the least amount of times of any of the victims at Cielo, his stab wounds were the most lethal. Part of the reasons is first of all, he was fighting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was aggressively fighting. But also is that the bayonet is a much more, that knife it's longer, and it's made for war. And so I don't know. Does that kind of answer your questions about the crime? I mean, but then also the descriptions of not just the wounds, but the personalities and the lifestyles of the victims too. Is that what you were referring to? Or
it does, yeah. And you just touched upon, that was one of the things too that I was actually going to bring up. You beat me to it, was the documentation of, and again, I know it's a graphic conversation, but the documentation of the wounds for not just Jay, but for all of them. I know here is kind of focusing specifically on Jay, and even like the wounds themselves in what he went through doesn't even still match the narrative that is still being pushed to this day. And, you guys give, again, the documentation and the research behind it to show what you are bringing to the table now. And can you touch a little bit upon that in detail? But again, if it's one of those topics where it's like, oh, let's not do that.
No, I want to. I want to address everything you ask. And Marshall,
I would just want to say common sense is what guided us. We knew.
I'm going to run to the bathroom, but keep talking.
Okay. Well, we knew that this was very murky, and so the guiding light was basically common sense. Let's go according to the fact. Let's go according to the documentation. Let's not try and speculate anything. Let's just try and let the facts guide us. Just like when the police do an investigation, that's what, you let the evidence guide you. Same here. We just let's not listen to this. Let's not listen to that. Let's base it on these documents. And then if we have to address other things, then we do that. So that was how I wanted to address things, because again, I think I said this before. We knew writing about Jay was going to be easy, but when we got to the murders, when we got to the trial, that's when things just get murky, and you just have to just focus on, okay, let's just focus on the facts. Let's not get into any sort of speculation. Let's not get into any craziness. We'll address that, what other people said, but let's just go with common sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And common sense, and again, it's kind of like, I'm glad you just scooted in.
Did you just buckle up?
Yeah, I drank so much coffee today, and so.
I didn't know it was going to be that type of show, but that's okay.
It's called Donnie After Dark for a reason.
I think common sense is a great point. I also think the truth. I mean, it's in the title. We want to tell the truth about something that has been it's absurdly distorted. And this is a historical event that relates to people. And if we understand it more through human dimension and the truth and the facts, maybe it'll resonate in a way that we can learn something from it. So that when we watch TV and we see a 6-year-old with a tiara and, pantyhose and adult makeup and these poses, and we're being fed a plate of feces, maybe candy-coated, maybe not, but maybe we're going to be less apt to consume it. Maybe we're going to know that we're being fed a bill of goods for someone's profit. And maybe we will see it when it happens to other people. So when JonBenet Ramsey, when that happened, I was so disgusted that so many people treated it as a form of profit.
Mm.
And I hold the same standard to the pieces of shit that exploit these murders, Joan Benet Ramsey, Nicole Brown, Ronald Goldman's murders, Elizabeth Short, her
Mhm.
murder. There's so many murders, and I don't want to, just name a few. But the people who would treat real tragedy as a cash cow, but to do it in a way that they strip the victims, the innocent, of their humanity, it's pretty low. It's disgusting. And when I see how my uncle was treated, let me tell you, I mean, if I learned that my uncle was maybe two of the things that was written about him after he was killed, that my father astutely said they didn't write that shit when he was alive, Anthony. And maybe I wouldn't have written the book. Maybe I wouldn't, maybe there was no story to tell because he was some of these things. But his story would still be interesting in what he created and what he defined and how he elevated and how he changed things.
Yeah.
But the more I saw that, I mean, this man was a despicable character. Jay Sebring was a despicable scumbag across the board. He was all these horrible things. And as I said, I think in the first part, I don't know too many people in my inner circle or my friends that are any of those things. But apparently Jay was all of those things. And so this is something that matters to us as a culture, whether it be how they were treated, how the victims are treated, were treated them and continue to be treated, how victims' rights are being flushed down the toilet today, which we got into with the parole chapters. There's so many elements to Jay Sebring's life and his life, death, and legacy that are universal across the board. And all you got to do is, that's the facts. I'm not saying this because I'm his nephew. I'm saying it because it's true. And,
yeah, absolutely.
and the worst thing you could ever do, and Marshall and I didn't even have to talk about it, but I think Marshall was very smartly, astutely aware of who I was. And he wanted to make sure that maybe I wasn't wanting to deify my uncle.
We had, as we told you before, Scott Seckel was going to be the original co-author of this book, and Anthony was going to be a contributor. And we had many discussions. We kept going round and round. If we include Anthony in this, how can we be objective? And it turned out that really didn't be an issue at all, because Anthony was very open about Jay's life and his lifestyle, and he was very aware of those things. So finally, it was just an editor that just said, just do it, let's just see what happens. And so it turns out that I think that we wrote a very objective piece on Jay and gave his flaws. And although I don't think he had many, he seemed to be a really interesting, good, upstanding guy who had a great vision.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think you tapped onto something that you actually said in our discussions, Marshall. It was, and I'm sorry, Danny, I don't want to, but it's a very interesting point that you made that I never thought of. And you said that our book is the first counter narrative to this historic, these crimes. And certainly it's not about the crimes. We cover it extensively, and dare I say, with more common sense with regard to the comprehensive collective motives and intentions of the Manson family, but also most importantly and we never lost sight of who the story is about. It's about Jay Sebring, who is universal on all the levels that we just covered. Marshall, tell Danny about when you mentioned the counter narrative. That this book is the first counter narrative.
Yeah, well, and that was that we knew in doing Jay's story. It just came out that we're going to have to we have an uphill battle, but this is the first counter narrative to the Helter Skelter story. And I did it before with a book that I did on Colonel Parker and Elvis Presley. Colonel Parker was looked upon as the villain always, and I was able to get a hold of documentation and letters and notes that showed that their relationship was much more cordial, that he was not a villain, that he cared for Elvis Presley very much. But the problem is that it's so ingrained in the culture and in the telling of that story But again, you know what we had to do was just say, screw it. This is what we're going to do. This is the documentation that we have. And if you don't believe it, that's fine. You don't believe it, but let's try and educate some people about this counter narrative that we're offering. And if they don't buy it, that's fine. They don't have to buy it. It is what it is. So that was just kind of a formal or informal conversation that we had.
I like, Anthony, what you said earlier on in the in our conversation, where you're spot on, where people who might make the comments about the book, have you read it? And chances are, if you did read it and get through it, and you still don't think, there's no changing your mind. You said that so perfectly earlier on, and that applies right now to what Marshall is saying. I just wanted to add that there, because it's so easy to, for somebody to be like, oh, well, they're too close or whatnot. Well, did you read it? Did you do your work? Did you read it? Chances are probably not.
Well, and I would agree, but then again, you're saying that from your perspective, and
very true.
And I'm saying it from my perspective, and Marshall, I know, believes that and feels it from his perspective. But there's a perspective there that is like, listen again. I needed to know the truth about my uncle. That's what I needed to know, whether I liked it or not. And I do think it's interesting when somebody says, well, he didn't even remember him. Well, I said I've addressed that. And if they don't believe it, who cares? But I do think it's important that for so many of these people who get off on these crimes, they either treat it as being to promote themselves or to be somehow relevant somehow, to make money, or to treat them as a way to soothe their insecurities or, feed their desires. I mean, there's a lot of people, surprisingly, that are like that. And what's interesting is they might challenge me for being a blood relative. And I would just say what we said in the book. And what I remember is that it's a fair question to think that maybe I might be too close to the subject matter, that I might be too close to the realities. And I would posit that maybe they're not close enough to the realities. And
there it is.
Yeah, and God forbid, I would never want anyone to know the realities that our families have gone through. And I include all of our families.
And let me add that him being a blood relative, there's a tenacity that Anthony has. He kept all that information. Jay's story would have died had it not been for Anthony collecting all this information and us looking at it and viewing it and able to finally write the narrative of his life story. So him being a blood relative meant that Jay is still, his story finally gets to be told.
So in regards to, moving through different parts of Jay's story, in regards to after the murders happen and after the people who are, again, being charged and brought to trial for what happened and for the murder of, Jay and everybody else who was attacked and killed in that house. Now, and I know it might be, obviously, Anthony, you were very young when the trial happened, but from you guys' perspective in regards to the trial, typically that would be where a lot of this information would come forward. And I again, not everything that actually happened was brought out until more recently, but can you guys talk us through a bit of the trial and maybe break down some of here's what went wrong or here's what should have happened or anything that you guys learned in your research about the way the trial was handled that you guys can kind of give light on for this?
Why don't I went through this today because I wrote the chapters on the trials. Let me just give you my cliff notes and then I'll wrap up with my perspective and then Anthony will have his. So we titled the chapter "The Family Shit Show" for a reason. It wasn't just the Manson family. The LA District Attorney's Office, mishandled this as well. And they had, I feel like they had probably an easy trial on their hands given the folks at hand. But let me just tell you about just some of the stuff that would happen. So, for example, the first district attorney on this was Aaron Stovitz, and then it fell to, and of course Stovitz, the judge had put a gag order on this case, and Stovitz.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Stovitz had mouthed off, I think, to Rolling Stone off the record, and everybody kind of figured out what happened, and that it was him. And then so the judge gave him a warning not to do that again. And then he gave some innocuous quote about Susan Atkins during trial, and he said, "Yeah, it was a performance worthy of Sandra Bernhardt." So then he was knocked off the case, and then it was offered to J. Miller Leary, who turned it down because he sensed that the trial would be a grind, and it was, because, as you know, it dragged on for 9 months. And then that's when it went to Vincent Bugliosi. So you already had two people that were supposed to try this, and then it winds it way down to Vincent Bugliosi, and then Attorney Paul Fitzgerald of the Public Defender's Office was first assigned to Manson's case, but then Manson insisted on acting as his own attorney, and then you had a presiding judge, William Keene, assign his attorney Joseph Ball to represent Manson, who said he was competent. And so he had to approve Manson's request. So then Manson began making all these incredible brash requests, including wanting the phone numbers of family members and, wanting transcripts and access to all this police information, which is ludicrous because he was going to be able to look at all that information and decipher it. And so after 3 months of like these incredible request, he got his privileges revoked, and then assigned a new defense attorney, Charles Hellepeter. And then Manson was so displeased with some of his motions that Manson then had him replaced by Ronald Hughes, who was a rookie lawyer who had never tried a case before. So then the following month, Manson had filed an affidavit of prejudice against Judge Keene, and this case was now assigned to Judge H. Older, a former World War II pilot. And then 2 weeks before trial, Manson requested a new attorney, Irvin Kanarak, who was a master in delay tactics. So then from there, you had 5 weeks of jury selection, which really should only take 2 weeks at most. And then, of course, another 9 months for a final verdict to happen. So as you can see, there's all this behind the scenes craziness happening even before the trial starts. And, I think Manson had a big part of that. I think that Manson was trying to not only manipulate the system, but make a farce of it. And then, of course, the antics that happened in the courtroom that, he was basically, he created a circus. And so with that, I'll let Anthony talk about what he thinks.
Thanks, Marshall. First of all, it's interesting. I was young, but my parents and grandparents made a Herculean effort to protect our family so that life could be as normal as possible. There are certain things you can't protect against, like, when am I going to see him again? Well, you can't protect against that. But in terms of the trials weren't televised. We did not go to the trials. My grandparents and parents really wanted to try to, they always reinforced to my sisters and I and to each other that Jay would never want us to suffer more than what is natural, and that we should live life with the same passion, zeal, and regard to quality that he did. And I'm grateful for that, because it did kind of protect that's what we focused on. So, but I think that with Bugliosi, I think it's an interesting question that you asked, Danny, and that is, I don't think that Vincent Bugliosi needed to lean on the helter-skelter motive.
No.
I don't know why he leaned on it. I think that, if he would have treated it just as we outlined in the book, actually, or as we shared earlier, if he would have outlined all the criminal activities. Now, maybe the only thing I can think of is that they decided it would be best to have all the different trials separate. So they thought maybe it'd be too hard to bring in that common gang thing, you know. But if they really went into the drug deal burn, Black Panthers, copycat, put the heat on the Panthers, spring Bosley out of prison, and do all of that. And then when you had you had the attempted murder of Barbara Hoyt. That speaks for itself. But I think that was happened during the trial. I think, I'm not sure. But then Donald Shea, I mean, that was, I don't want to say this is the right word, but it was like for self-preservation. They thought he either ratted them out or that they was going to have them kicked off the ranch. And so, you know, I think that if he would have done all of those, he would have gotten the death penalty for all of them just as well. But the difference was because he leaned on the helter-skelter thing, which seems a little too ridiculous. And I think it is. Like, again, if we're to look at it mutually exclusively, like, okay, that's the whole thing. No, that's bullshit. There's no way in hell. You're going to go hide in a rock and then you're going to go in there and the black people are too stupid. And, you know, Manson's the smart guy. It's going to save African-Americans. Okay. It's insane. And unfortunately, that's part of why we're dealing with all the bullshit that our families have to deal with in these parole hearings. It's part of why we deal with the good memories of our loved ones being trashed in so much exploitation and sensationalism. And do I think that Vincent Bugliosi knew that would be a consequence? No. Well, I can't say definitively no. I don't think so. I think he was thinking about doing what he was doing, but he certainly had no regard for the victims in his book, and he certainly didn't care one way or the other. But I think that that's a very interesting point. I'm glad you brought it up, because had he just addressed it for what they were, there would not be all these dark shadows where people are like, ooh, you know, oh yeah, it was the Martians, it was the, you know, CIA, it was drug dealing, it was warlocks and witches. I mean, it's insane. And so that I think that's a very important point in that, you know what I mean?
So where your family, you know, made the choice to again not go and attend, were they still, I guess, being made aware of at least what was happening as the trial was unfolding, so nothing would come as a surprise, I guess, after the 9-month period before the verdict?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, they were. I remember my parents were saying that they were reading everything they could, and there was obvious communication with our relatives, my grandparents, their parents, and my uncle and aunt in Michigan. No, there's no doubt they were definitely abreast of it, but it's not something they were going to be like, hey, honey, you know, so today in court, you know, there was not like, we didn't discuss it. And I think, again, that was to really protect our family and to make sure that our family, that we would live as normal of a possible life. And, you know, there was one source that asked to not be revealed in our book, and they said that they wanted me to, you know, to remain anonymous, and we honored that. So we went back and forth, and in my questioning, I'm like, well, you know, these people are talking about the drug deal and this and that, and this source said, Anthony, move on. You cannot trust the press. It's all bullshit, but move on, as if this is the only thing that was happening in my life. And it's true. One of my life missions has been really revealing Jay's true life story. And that includes his death and his legacy. But there's other things in my life that I do that I'm very proud of that I don't talk about in these things. And I'm very active in those things. But that's because of what my parents and grandparents did with so much courage and character and grace to protect my sisters and I from really making these murders define us. You know what I mean? They don't define us. They bring us together as a family in our fight for justice. But they've also brought us together in what my grandparents instilled in Jay, what Jay would instill in his family, and what my parents instill in my sisters and I.
It's just, I don't even have words, like just the strength of your family to make that choice. And I mean, it's hard either way.
Yeah, it is hard, but you got to live life. And I've seen people who were destroyed by it.
Yeah.
It really destroyed them. And you got, whether it be these crimes or others, it's really sad. And sometimes you have no choice. But I am so grateful to my parents and grandparents. And, I would love to talk to my grandfather, Jay's father, my mom's father. He was flying monthly back and forth from Michigan. I mean, this is a single income, middle class family from the Midwest. And he was tending to his son's estate, trying to keep the business and the business enterprise afloat. And we all pulled together. Now, again, this wasn't something that they were like, Anthony, there's some things going on at the shop and we might have to move to LA and blah, blah, blah. There was none of that. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, we did everything to protect each other. And when things were going very wrong at the shop on Fairfax, my mother and father were very happy in Las Vegas, but they had offered to move to LA to be the eyes and to actually work and take care of Jay's legacy, his enterprise. And because my grandfather was flying out, and I wish I could have talked to him because he was coming out here monthly, sometimes multiple times in a month. And the letters that he wrote to just everything, and my grandmother, and what they did with their grace and love. I mean, it's just, I can't, as a kid, you never knew this, but I wish I could talk to them. And if my grandmother was alive today, I wouldn't even talk to her about this, but I would talk to my grandfather about it. I mean, like when you were flying out, I can't believe you had to do that. People weren't paying the rent. What do you mean? For how long? Why wouldn't, I mean, and my grandmother said, please do not move to Los Angeles. You got to remember, not you, but I mean, her oldest son was slaughtered there. And then he was slaughtered by the press. And now she has her youngest daughter and son-in-law with her only grandchildren offering to move to the same city.
Yeah.
To take care of the family business. And my grandmother, her family was more important. And that's not to say that their son's enterprise was massively important. And, this was another one of those things in Greg King and Bugliosi's books, that there was some sort of disinheritance with the family and a family schism. This is so disgusting to me. It was the complete polar opposite. Where this shit came from, it came from the same place that, that there was mutilation and that, people are pulling puppet strings and all this bullshit. But for my grandparents to have to read that shit, and Marshall, like when we were going over some of our things, I sent him hundreds of check stubs that my grandparents sent to their son from 1955 all the way through to 1959 when he finally landed. And that was blood, sweat, and tears. And when the business was yanked and pulled from the family the way it was, and then to read that shit in books afterwards, it's disgusting. And someone might say, well, why are you writing a book? That's one of the main reasons. That's another reason why. You don't say that he's a coward and Jay does what he did. That's bullshit. You don't call him a racist and half his staff is completely integrated. His best friends, he launches Bruce Lee's entire film career. That's bullshit. He's a creepy pervert. No, he was he was loved and people loved being with him. That's bullshit. And when you attack Jay's family, my family, and say things that are completely fucking polar opposite of what the fucking truth is, that's bullshit. It's time to tell a story, the true story. And I'm sorry, sometimes it's like, I don't like to get like that. And sometimes I feel like this in these parole hearings. It's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going.
And Danny, you have to be around the DiMaria family to know like the love that emanates from them. I've been around them 3 times now. And I have a very loving family too. And when you come from a loving family, you recognize it in someone else. And man, I tell you, the DiMaria family are just tight. They're close. They're loving. It's something to be around. It's really that's very, very graceful. And so when he talks about his grandparents being like that, I can just imagine that. So
Yeah.
very special being around them. And again, I can't even imagine to read about someone in their family and all those hurtful things. It's just got to be terrible.
Yeah. And it's so unfortunate that we still see that we're in, 2025 and it still happens.
It seems like, for the DiMaria family, this is not going to end until all those people die in prison. And California is trying to find every single reason to get them out of prison. It's crazy. It's nuts. If they could do it, they would. I saw Gavin Newsom talk the other day about the California prison system and how it's not working, and how these criminals get out and 2 or 3 years later they're committing crimes. Well, it's like, yeah, they're prisoners, and if your system sucks, then you change it, but you don't close prisons. That's what's going on. Anthony can talk about the decarceration policies that are going on in the state.
Can we just jump back 1 second?
Sure.
I just want to make sure we get as much clarification on, because we were, again, talking about the different aspects of Jay that were just completely, to say fabricated, it puts it lightly, but completely falsified in the media. But his finances was one of those things. And if my Wi-Fi is a little shoddy, I apologize. I kind of see it slightly on another screen I have open. But his finances was one of those things, and that wasn't the case. And then, in regards to Jay's business and those who took over after his death, and how your family still had to step in, and you mentioned your grandfather flying, back and forth to California. But can you kind of, Anthony, kind of touch upon the truth about Jay and his finances, because you guys brought receipts, you brought documentation to the book.
I mean, that's all we did. I mean,
I know, and I hate to say that after every sentence, but like I just want to that point out there.
I don't think you can hit that over the head enough. And that because I kind of knew that the whole dynamic in all of this is going to be like, oh, come on, they're bullshit. No, and I've seen how so many of all these other books, that in some cases are wildly successful, and I guess good for them. I just couldn't do it to somebody, and so I knew that we had to bring the receipts, as you said. So at the filing, there was a judge. Okay, so and I actually wrote in my notes here. On August 21st, 1969, okay, they did a court hearing, and it was Superior Judge Ben Koenig, and he estimated that Jay's estate exceeded $500,000. So I don't know what the worth of $500,000 is. Now, this is a court hearing, so they don't just you don't say, oh, well, I know he was worth this, his Porsche's worth that, and that you don't just make these judgments in court, in a Superior California court, with random people. Had to provide these things. So his home, his businesses, his all these things. So his worth on August 21st, 1969, by a judge, was found to be to exceed $500K. Now, in our records, and again, I wish I could talk to my grandparents and my grandfather. He saved every single document. And again, all those check stubs that I sent to Marshall, I mean, there's like 100 of them. And so he filed Jay's 1970. It was the Sebring estate tax. Thanks, Jay.
Yep.
4.5 million today. Okay. So now Jay, my grandfather, who was in charge of the estate, it was filed in December of late 69 with the California Supreme Court, and his assets value, and this is after a lawsuit that Jay had lost, and I can get into that later, but it was at $338,960.49. That is definitive. That has been filed, and that is known. So, and by the way, that was when loans were paid out, like not loans from Jay, but people some investors and things. But also, he had a lawsuit with Nelson Barclift, who was he lived nearby. He was actually a famous choreographer who was the lover of Cole Porter. I forget which writer, but a very significant one. So Jay accidentally, or not, he built a driveway in the back of his house that led to the back of his house, and it went a few inches into this neighbor's yard. And so that was the lawsuit. And after Jay was killed, it was settled. And so the court decided that it was $30,000 that was owed from the state. That was after. So we're at, anyway, I'm sorry. Does that answer it?
No, it absolutely does. And also there was, for those who haven't read the book, maybe if you just want to give a little bit of detail, some of the, the whole thing about the dentist bill, and he owed all this money. He, didn't have the type of money that he said, and he was, in debt to his dentist. And when that was not true, because that was something you guys really focused on the book too. And you guys gave that documentation with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I wish I had the number. It was more along the lines of 2,300 or 25. I think it was 24. I'm not sure.
I'll look it up here real quick while you're talking.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Marsh. Man, you both, it's good to be talking to you. I'm an electronic dinosaur. I would have to get back to you a couple days from now. So Roman in his polygraph said they shared the same dentist, and that Jay says he told me it was he owed him $5,400, $5,700, $5,900, whatever it was.
Here we go. I have it. Jay, yeah. He said Jay owed him $5,400. And he showed me the sheet balance that was up to like $6,500. And he was paying him like $100 a month. And let me see the footnote here. Yeah. So, yeah.
So
Jay, footnote, just
that what was owed to the dentist was $2,300. I think I'm almost certain on that. And the thing is that Jay had his tooth knocked out of his mouth when he was in the Navy by one of his officers, and he shoved the tooth back in his mouth. So what Roman, I don't know if the dentist actually told him this, and he came up with this figure. But that's what Jay actually owed the dentist. And it was for a series of oral surgeries to keep that dead tooth in his mouth. There's a photo that we have that you can see the sterling silver band around his tooth. And yeah, I mean, it's so my point is this is not a guy who can't pay for his cleanings. This is somebody who had major oral surgeries. And Jay was he was one of these guys that was so unique. He had a motorcycle helmet, right? And it had this ankh, and it was emblazoned, and it was what do you call it when it's raised a little bit? It's embossed. No, it's not. It was okay. It's an ankh, and it was like right on the forehead, and it had a little black outline inside and outside the ankh. Okay. Now our family has saved everything of Jay's. And now this is the uniqueness. This ties into the tooth story because he shoved the tooth in his mouth and it died, and it would keep. It did keep because I asked Dennis, could it keep? And he said, yeah, it could keep if it was in a certain time. So he wanted that tooth no matter what. I would have just got a cap in there or something. I mean, but no, not Jay. He wants his tooth. He's going to keep it. And so one night I'm sleeping and in my room, and I was like in grade school, and I'm looking, and on my bookshelf, I'm laying in bed, and I'm like, what is that? And I'm like, and it was my uncle's motorcycle helmet on top of one of the shelves in the book, and the ankh is glowing. So Jay put on his motorcycle helmet, and Marshall, it's the where he's in the Formula One car,
right?
Okay, so if you blow it up, the goggles are over that ankh. So it's that helmet. And so anyway, I was like, holy crap, that is a glow in the dark ankh. So Jay, he didn't, and you could tell he didn't buy it that way. He put it on there. So Jay was like this mischievous guy, but liked to put his little extra stamp on things, like the 4 ellipses. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You guys, but anyway, so Jay didn't even, he owed a third of what was being alleged, you know, and it was totally out of context, and he was going to pay him back. I mean, and he
Yeah.
was paying him back, and actually the doctor was paid back.
And there it is, folks. And there it is. So I know we'll be coming up on 2 hours soon. The parole hearings, I think we'll have to do a separate show, because there's a lot to talk about with that. But before we kind of wrap up, I just want to, if we can briefly just put out there. So what happened, Marshall and Anthony, to Jay's estate and to the business after he passed away? So for those who aren't familiar with that or haven't read the book yet, what can you kind of tell us about that? Because there's a lot to it.
Yeah. So essentially, in a nutshell, after Jay was killed, there were Bob Cox, Paul Yamashiro, Wardell, Dell Jackson. They called him Dell at the shop. They were just 3 of the people who had been cutting. Wardell Jackson was with Jay from 61 all the way through Jay's death. And Paul was there for about 5 years. Bob Cox was there for a long period of time. John Madden evidently called Jim Markham in New Mexico to have him come in and to be, I don't know what you would say, but to run the salon, or to be Jay, to take Jay's position. I don't know, to take over for Jay. And there was a story that that I think someone said that, or Jim, I'm not sure who, that, if Jay said to Jim, if anything ever happens to me, you're the only one who can, take over, or something like that. So then Robert Pappin, Helen Nielsen, and Jim Markham, they became the managing partners of the salon. And the salon was doing quite well, according to all types of people. The receptionist staff, the workers. I would say in November of 1970, things got very strained financially, and they were not paying their monthly rent. And my grandfather was asking for the rent. So November, December, no rent. And then they did pay, I think it was November, December now. But then communication became strained between the managing partners and our family. And at a certain point, and by the way, this is another one of those stories where it's been alleged that Jay's parents abruptly filed Jay's business for bankruptcy in May of 1971. That is complete and utter bullshit. The managing partners at the Fairfax Salon were delinquent February, March, April, and May. And Jay's parents were completely responsible for that. And again, single income, middle class, a couple in Michigan, they couldn't handle it. It was a strain. And so my parents, and we covered this, that's when my parents said, we will take care of this, because they wanted to protect their parents. Jay's parents, my grandparents.
Yeah.
I'm going to read something to you. It's February 6, 1971. And it says, "Dear Helen, Jim, and Bob, there is a delinquency in your payment of $1,000 rent for the month of January 1971. The tardiness in that of $1,000 rent for the month of February, and deficient in supplying the $1,000 funds as deposit per lease. At this writing, a sum total of $3,000. I'm sure it is not your intention to show a lack of fiscal responsibility. As keeper of the records of the estate, I thought it advisable to direct your attention to the above. In previous correspondence relating to tardiness and in rental payments, you were apprised of the need of these funds by the estate to meet its fixed monthly obligation. Should you do less? You enjoy the use of the premises. You were afforded an opportunity comparable to none other, in that which was established, developed, and nurtured by the decedent Jay Sebring. But you deal a financial blow to his estate and his memory, which is inequitable, to say the least. I'm not going to finish the statement, but this is some of the documentation of thousands of documents that my grandfather, that Jay's father saved. You know, again, it's astounding, but how anyone could say that Jay's parents abruptly filed for bankruptcy like it was flippant when they funded him when Jay was struggling his whole time until he got his break. That is disgusting.
Yeah.
And for these things to have happened to my grandparents, to Jay's parents, after all they did and after all their son did, and all the trips they shared together, even up until late 68. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would be like to have your son slaughtered and then his business shit on? Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I only bring this up. It's like they didn't just, I'll tell you, somebody that was close to Jay, very close to Jay, they said, you know, I have to tell you that my mother felt that they were very upset with your grandparents. And I'm not going to tell you who this is. You might even know who it is, but I'm not talking about that. But this person said to me, my parents were very, you know, later on, they became very upset. They were upset with your grandparents. And I said, why would they do that? I have the correspondences. Well, this person said that, well, they just felt that maybe they sold Jay's business out. And I said, well, you don't know the truth. I said, by the way, where did they hear that from? And suffice to say, it's somebody who either had something to hide or to protect. So,
jeez.
One of the reasons that this book is out, it's for Jay's life story, what he did, what he accomplished.
Well, I think that's a good way to end tonight's episode. And thank you, Anthony, for sharing that. And to see, you know, it's one thing when you read the book, like, you get the heart behind it and you get the emotion behind it, but to have like these types of, you know, conversations with you both of you behind the scenes of this book, and especially you, Anthony, with, I mean, the amount of documents that your grandparents saved so that you are able to go back and see these things for yourself. And it's astounding in the best way, but also still to see how I mean, it's just so emotional.
But it gets to my point of, if myself or Scott Seckle were to do this without Anthony's participation, we would not have access to those things. We wouldn't have access to the truth. So therefore, it makes total sense that Anthony would be involved because he knows more than anybody.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's you know, it's a testament to Jay's entire family, you know. And I'm glad that, you know, I kind of knew that that's what you were doing, Marshall, in the beginning with Scott. And it was like, oh, yeah, we're going to have him be like a fact checker and the other story. But then when we actually started writing, Marshall is a very confident, talented man. And and I take this very seriously because he gave me an opportunity to really do some serious writing. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful to that. And you know, and I think that we've done something very special. And it's out there, and the flame has been ignited. But I think it's been out there, and it is interesting. And again, I'll let you go, but some of these things are out there, and for some people to still deny them and to say, "Oh no, that didn't happen," or all you got to do is do the research. You know what I'm saying? But
we didn't give context to the amount that was owed. I'm looking here at a letter from April. $4,000 was owed to your grandparents. That's 40 grand today. So it sounds like a small amount now, but can you imagine like somebody saying, "Hey, you owe 40 grand." It's like,
well, and
I can't cover that.
That doesn't include May either.
Yeah. So that's 5 grand, 50 grand.
Jeez. Yeah. So we'll have to do a part 3. And if we have to invite Paul back from the Paulcast, we'll talk about it. But
I mean, is it important to talk about the Rostow stuff or no?
I think
next time.
Yeah.
Or not even talk about it. I mean, but just what's interesting is that like there are certain personalities, and Danny, I'm sorry, this is going to be Danny after way dark. So it's interesting in what some of these different people that they hinge. Okay, this is the person they hang their everything, their life savings, their whole existential being on Charles Watson. It's on the tapes. It's on Joel Rostow. It's on and then after a recent book, it's Joe Torrenueva, and then we we speak to every one of them, and they debunk all of these things, and it's like, are they all lying? Why would they all lie, especially when there's nothing to lie about?
Right.
And so now, anyway, I'm sorry. Should I not have said any of that?
No. The platform is yours. Do with it what you will. Honestly, we can definitely. There's so much more for us to touch upon. I know next time we have you back, one of the things that I think is really, really important to discuss is things did not just end for your family and the other victim's family when the trial ended. Yes, they were sentenced, but as we know, that all changed. And now there is so much that your family and all of the other victims' family have to go through year after year after year. Yeah. And there's been a lot that's gone on. And I think we really need to discuss this because things didn't just end back then. It's still something that you and your family are fighting for, and we definitely need to address that. So,
and before I forget, I also think that just like with so many other things, that Jay, it is expansively relevant. You know what I'm saying? So that means and I really appreciate your point there, but it also, and we get into this in the book, it's part of the larger picture that it impacts other victims of other violent crimes and victims of violent crime. And that's also another reason why it's so powerful. And I'm grateful that Marshall and I were able to really include that. And because it's something larger than our family, all the victims' family of these murders. It's when it comes to what you just described, it really impacts thousands. I mean, certainly in California of victims of violent crime, but possibly nationwide. Yeah.
And we'll definitely get more on that. Paul from the Paulcast agreed. Great show. Well, thank you, Paul. We'll see you next time. But and then here where Debbie says she should be finished by the book before the next interview with you guys. So
right on.
All right. Well, thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Marshall, for coming back for part 2 of this. We will schedule part 3, and I will let everybody know once we do that. In the meantime, if you have not picked up the book, now is your chance. Do that before the next time they are back on, and make sure to get all of their links for social medias down below. Make sure to check that out as well. And if you missed part 1, go back and listen so that you get the entirety. As much as we could capture in a few hours of setting the record straight on who Jay was in Jay's story. So thank you again, Anthony and Marshall. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.